Now, let's talk about the history of global reserve currencies themselves. How did global reserve currencies evolve in the world? It all started in the year 500 BC, almost 2500 years ago, when the Greeks came up with the Greek drachma, which was a bronze or a copper coin. It was supposedly accepted across the world. After that, maybe 100-200 years later, the Roman denari came up, which was a silver coin, and it became the global reserve currency, which stayed on for a couple of hundred years. After that, the Byzantine solidus, which was a gold coin, came up, and after that, the Arab dinar, which is also a gold coin, came. And later, in around 1000 AD, the Venetian ducato from Venice, which was a silver coin, became one of the most accepted currencies in the world. The Florentine florin came up in around 1300 AD, and around 300 years later, in 1600 AD, the Indian rupiah, which was a gold and a silver coin, came up to be the global reserve currencies at that time. In 1600 AD, Indian economy was one of the largest, and every single ship or boat was going to the Indian economy. So the Indian rupiah became extremely big. After that, once the sea travel became extremely important, the Europeans, especially the Dutch guilder became a global reserve currency in about 1700 AD. Then the French franc under Napoleon Bonaparte became a global reserve currency. But here they brought out a new type of innovation. They said that, okay, we are traveling across the world, we are carrying such heavy gold, which might become extremely tough because gold is heavy. Second, it is people can steal it, and gold, it becomes very tough to store, etc. So what we should do is we need to create an organization, a bank, which will take all the gold that people have, and in return they will give a signed paper saying that, okay, I promise you that I will return this gold to you when you come and exchange this paper at any time. So what happened was the invention of pegged currency came up. That is, a paper currency is much lighter than gold and silver, and since it can be used to travel across the world, the paper currency became much more famous. So what the banks, the central banks, the organizations did was they collected gold from everybody, they collected silver from everybody, and then they started printing money, printing paper currency, and started giving to everybody. Now here's something extremely important happened. The behavior of people themselves had changed. For over 2000 years, people were using valuable currency such as gold or silver with themselves. With the French new innovation, they had to give that gold or silver, which was valuable, and then take paper in return. A paper was nothing, it was just signed by some person saying that I promise you to pay this amount of money when you return from your travels. And that was a very large change from a behavior perspective. So this paper currency became much more famous. It was still pegged to something intrinsic, something valuable, such as gold or coin. So tomorrow, if I take this paper currency back to the bank, the French bank, National Bank, would give back the gold or silver back to me. This was an extremely innovative concept for that time. Later, after around 1800 AD, the Britain's pound sterling became the global reserve currency because the British Empire, as they said, it extended across the world. So everybody was accepting the Britain's pound sterling. After that, the World War I came. The World War I destroyed half of European countries in the year 1914 to 18. Then World War II came, where the entire European countries became extremely weak, all the currencies became weak. At that particular point, the United States came up, which was not at all affected by the world wars because it was completely in a different geography, but it became a very powerful economy. So what happened was the United States dollar became the next global currency. So in the last 50 to 60 years, after the World War II, after the Bretton Woods Agreement, the United States dollar at that time was still pegged to an intrinsic valuable currency such as the gold or silver. and every country in the entire world started accepting US dollars to perform the international transactions, because there was no other powerful country for the first 50 years after the World War II. The paper money still was considered, had intrinsic value because it was still pegged to the gold. But in the year 1971, US President Nixon decided that the fiat currency will no longer have any backing. That is, you cannot come to the central bank and ask for gold in return. You cannot just give your paper currency and actually take something of intrinsic value in return. And from then, the inflation started. The central bank confiscated all the golds of the entire population, and the paper currency were not pegged anymore. They were depegged from the currencies, and since the gold was limited in supply, there was not much of inflation in the currencies till then. For the first 2,500 years, there was not much of an inflation because the currency was still pegged to something valuable such as gold. But from 1971 onwards, since there was no more pegging to the real world intrinsic valuable objects such as gold or silver, the central bank could start printing as much currency as they would want. So since the real gold was not connected to the paper money supply kept on increasing rapidly. As much as the central bank wanted, they started printing. Because of the supply increased much faster than the demand, the value of the currency itself reduced, which is happening across the world anyways. The central banks of every country across the world can print as much as they want without any pegged intrinsic valuable gold in their coffers, and this increases the inflation rate. This devalues, this debases the entire currency. So this went on till 30 to 40 years, and around 2010, all the European countries by then who became better understood, and then they said that we need to get together to have a stronger currency, and they brought in the euro. Then the Chinese yuan also became very powerful. The Chinese economy itself grew rapidly. So for the last 10 years, we see the euro, the Chinese yuan, and the United States dollar to be global reserve currencies, in addition to Japanese yen, pound sterling, etc., to name a few. But since then, there were multiple global reserve currencies. We recognize that these are not backed by any real world value. All these are fiat currencies. So a digital, decentralized currency such as the Bitcoin is one of the most perfect candidates to be a global reserve currencies, which can be acceptable by all citizens. As I told you, the Chinese yuan will not be accepted by US citizens, the US dollar will not be accepted by Chinese citizens, and there will be some kind of clash between the euro, the yen, and the yuan and the USD, for which they will take a compromise position to also adopt Bitcoin as one of the global reserve currencies. That is, once it has enough acceptability, adaptability in the next 20 to 30 years. So that is a brief history of global reserve currencies and a bit of prediction / future of where this particular global reserve currencies would go ahead. The value of Bitcoin was always ridiculed by these large banks, large organizations such as Morgan Stanley. They say that Bitcoin's real value could be zero, just a couple of years ago. Now, Morgan Stanley becomes the first big US bank to offer Bitcoin funds. The same was said by JP Morgan's boss, saying that Bitcoin is just a scam, it is a fraud, which will be useless in 3-4 years. But now JP Morgan says that investors should make Bitcoin as 1% of the portfolios. Goldman Sachs also said that Bitcoin is not an asset class, and now Goldman Sachs themselves have opened a crypto desk as well. In the same way, Visa, MasterCard, whatnot, everybody ridiculed Bitcoin as an asset class. It's not a currency, it's nothing, but all of them are completely in the game right now. Visa is working to enable Bitcoin purchases. MasterCard just acquired CipherTrace, which is a crypto blockchain analytics firm. So all in all, what we are seeing is that the adoption of crypto itself is increasing rapidly. Everybody is getting into the crypto game. Crypto itself is becoming mainstream, and Based on the graph that we see, that is Ethereum's, we see that the transactions, the quarterly transactions itself has touched almost $1.5 trillion have been settled on the Ethereum blockchain itself in 2021. It is about to reach almost $6 trillion by the end of the year 2021. So this shows the adoption of crypto becoming extremely fast-paced, and not just retail investors, but institutional investors, banks, government themselves are getting into this particular field. So that is how the entire evolution of cryptocurrencies has evolved from a global reserve currency perspective.